Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS Legal Hotline lawyer, and today I want to talk about Forms 40 and 40A. And if you don't use those forms, do not hang up. You need to understand the operation of Forms 40 and 40A, whether you are familiar with those forms yet or not. Form 40 is a long-standing form in the statewide form system. Form 40 is the form that many brokers use, or office administrators within a broker's firm may use, to notify escrow that seller is paying compensation to the listing firm and to the buyer broker firm in the following amounts. Form 40, also known as a Commission Disbursement Agreement, gets completed typically by the listing broker, sometimes by the buyer broker, sometimes by both, and gets delivered to the escrow officer, who then takes that information when completing the settlement statement to put funds in seller's columns, funds that will be taken from seller's proceeds, put funds in seller's column for payment to the listing firm and to the buyer broker firm. And if that compensation disbursement agreement does not get delivered, or some version of it, then escrow has no way of knowing the compensation that will be paid from the seller's proceeds, and it will not be entered into the settlement statement. Form 40A is a newer form. It is the form, the statewide form, that you would use to accomplish the exact same notification to escrow, except that buyer is paying the compensation. And so Form 40A will almost always be generated by the buyer broker putting escrow on notice that in buyer's column, compensation should be identified for payment to the buyer brokerage firm, so that when the number is totaled up at the bottom and buyer is told how much they need to bring to closing, then the amount of buyer broker's compensation that buyer is paying is included in that number. Now, if you've listened to all of this and you say, I'm still not familiar with Form 40 or 40A because I don't handle delivery of commission disbursement agreements, you still need to be paying attention, because here's the problem. Once again, I've said this over and over again in videos recently, but we are in a new brokerage industry landscape. None of the rules that used to be true are still the same, or at least many of them are not. Because there is now greater question in an escrow officer's mind as to who is paying compensation between seller and buyer, and because there are so many lender regulations that are impacted by a buyer's payment of compensation, the information about brokerage compensation must be delivered to escrow at the outset of the escrow being opened. At mutual acceptance, when escrow is opened, that is when the commission disbursement agreements for seller paying or buyer paying or both should be delivered to escrow. And that doesn't happen in today's world. We need to change our practices, brokers, to make that happen. And that's true whether you individually are in charge of delivering the 40 and the 40A to escrow, or whether somebody else in your firm, maybe a team leader, maybe an office administrator, maybe your designated broker, somebody else in your firm, in many cases, delivers that commission disbursement agreement for you. You, broker, are incentivized to make sure that whoever it is that delivers your commission disbursement agreement to escrow does it immediately upon opening of escrow. Escrow needs that information. They need to communicate that information to the lender. And it's also true, brokers, if even within your firm structure you've never heard of Forms 40 or 40A because your firm uses its own version of a commission disbursement agreement. That's fine. I don't care if you use Form 40 and 40A or some other version of a form that accomplishes the same goal. The point of this video is, brokers, you are solely in control. Well, I shouldn't say you're solely in control. You are solely to bear the burden if escrow doesn't know the amount of compensation that should be paid to the brokers, and so your compensation doesn't get included on the settlement statement. The worst thing that can happen is that escrow doesn't know the compensation that's supposed to be paid to a broker, and they don't include it in the settlement statement. The settlement statement gets delivered to the buyer, and the buyer is told you need to bring $8,367 to closing, but in fact, the number is substantially more than that because the settlement statement didn't reflect buyer's obligation to pay buyer broker compensation. And so now when you, as the buyer broker, see that settlement statement, that draft settlement statement, and you say, what? My compensation's not in here. This number is really small compared to what it's supposed to be. You contact escrow who says, sorry, not my fault. Nobody told me that buyer had to pay your compensation. Send me the commission disbursement agreement now. You do. And now they have to revise the settlement statement. And now they have to deliver another settlement statement to the buyer, telling the buyer that the amount originally given to them is not the right number and in fact is much, much less than what the buyer actually has to bring. That is never good news to deliver to a buyer who's already stressed out because they're approaching the closing date of probably the singularly largest financial transaction of their life. So brokers, take control of this situation. And if you are the one who delivers the commission disbursement agreements to escrow, do it when you open escrow. If somebody else in your firm does it, then ask them to deliver it when escrow is opened. And the pushback I sometimes get is, well, yeah, but sometimes the amount of compensation changes. Sometimes the amount of compensation changes. The parties negotiate inspection contingency or other issues, and all of a sudden my compensation changes. Okay, then you're going to spend less than 5 minutes, or whoever is in charge in your office of preparing the commission disbursement agreement is going to spend less than 5 minutes submitting a revised and new current commission disbursement agreement. Believe me, it's worth the investment of that 5 minutes in time to get escrow the information they need in a timely manner. If you have questions on this topic or any other, please send a question to me by visiting warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.